In a previous lesson, we saw how to test form submissions. But we know one of the nice things about LiveView is it can handle changes before we submit the form. So let's see how we can test interactive forms. If you go to your router, you'll see that we have a newsletter live. Go ahead and open that up. And if you open up your browser, you'll see that this newsletter live is a very simple sign-up form, right? It has an email input, and then you can just submit that. And as you type it, we should be validating that the email has at least an @ sign. And so we can see that in our HTML. Let's go ahead and analyze that right now. As you can see, when we render this, we're using a simple form component that comes from Phoenix. We're going to use the ID subscribe. We're going to use the Phoenix change validate event here, and we just pass the change set. The rest is a simple input here, and then we are just submitting the form with a button. If you look at the mount, we are defining a new change set here and assigning it. And then once the user types in something, we'll trigger this validate event. So it'll pass the subscription parameters. We grab those parameters, we pass that to the newsletter, new subscription change set, and we put the action here so that it actually triggers those validations. Now, if you want to go ahead and open up the newsletter subscription module, and as you can see, we're only validating that the email is required and that it has an @ sign in there. Email validation is known to be fraught with issues, so this is just a very simple validation. So let's go ahead and head back to our LiveView and go ahead to the test. Open up Test, Ranger Web, Live, Newsletter, Live Test. And let's write our first test. Let's go ahead and say that it warns user of invalid email as user types. Taking the connection struct as usual, and let's set up our LiveView the normal way. We'll take the OK, grab the view, ignore the HTML. And we'll mount this at the newsletter path. All right. Now, just like we did with the render submit, we're going to grab the view. We're going to target the form by ID. So this was subscribe. And here we pass the form payload just like before. So subscription and email. And here we're going to pass an invalid email. Let's go ahead and define that invalid email. And once again, this just has to have an email that doesn't have an @ sign is basically all the validation we're doing. So when we submitted the form, we were doing a render submit. As you might guess here, we're going to do a render change. And this is going to trigger that Phoenix change attribute. And so we're going to do the validation. Now, what I'm going to do is grab the HTML that is returned from here. And all I'm going to do is assert that that HTML string has invalid format in it. Let's go ahead and run the test. And it passes. Perfect. Now, as you might see, this is the standard format of how we test LiveView. We grab a view, we target an element or a form, and then we perform an action. But you might be wondering, why am I using the HTML here instead of using the hasElement helper? After all the wonderful things I've said about that helper, and I wanted to do this because I want to show you that there's nothing wrong with it using the HTML returned by those actions, so long as we know that the text is not going to be present in that page in any other case, right? So in this case, I'm pretty confident that the hasInvalid format is not there unless something has gone wrong with the form. So I'm happy with this test, but of course you can write it if you want with the hasElement helper. This is more clear if you write the test first and then write the implementation, which is what I typically do. But even in this case, you can follow that logic through and make sure it's true. Now, I do want to write this in the alternate render change function. Let's go ahead and copy this. And update this to say target event directly. And as we've seen before, this is going to target the event right here. So we're going to pass in validate, and then we'll pass the entire form data. I'm just going to inline this. Let's go ahead and run this test. Now, as we've seen before, because we're removing that form helper, we're not going to have our HTML being validated. But in this case, we can't just go ahead and remove the entire form, because when we render the validate event, the error is shown up in this input. And so we can't actually remove all of it. The test would fail. But I want to show you one thing that the form helper is doing for us. If you go ahead and remove the Phoenix change validate, that's the part of LiveView that's doing this validation dynamically, right? And that's exactly what we're trying to test. So if I run the test, we would hope that it would fail, but it passes because once again, it doesn't have any HTML validation, right? It's not validating that for us. By contrast, if you run the first test that is using the form helper, you will see that it validates that that element with the subscribe attribute has a Phoenix change attribute. In this case, it doesn't have it because we removed it. And so this is exactly what we would want to see. So once again, that shows you how powerful that form element or element helper with the action is. I'll see you in the next lesson.